Welcome to Filmstrip, movie reviews presented by Continuous Play Podcast. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Filmstrip. I'm Jay.
I'm Ron.
And this is our review of Shaft. Starring Richard Roundtree, Moses Gunn, Charles Cioffi, and directed by Gordon Parks. Released in 1971 on a budget of $500,000, grossed over $13 million at the box office. Why are we doing Shaft, Ron? It's February.
Well, as you know, as everyone knows, February is Black History Month, and Shaft is one of the most noteworthy of the blaxploitation genre of films. And I've been on you since I started doing the podcast that we need to do Blaxploitation History Month. And finally, my enthusiasm got the better of your good sense, and we are engaging in just such an activity.
Yes, we are. We'll run down all the films we're going to do later at the end if you haven't heard us talk about them on other shows yet. But we're starting with Shaft. 1971 Shaft. Now, I actually owned the DVD to the 2000 Shaft, the remake with Samuel L. Jackson. I shouldn't say remake. It's more just like the continuation because Roundtree's in that movie. But I knew of Shaft. I think everybody knows Shaft, that theme song that I kind of mimicked there at the opening. Everybody knows that thing. I mean, I think Shaft is one of those recognizable pieces. I'll be honest with you, though, for years, I thought Shaft was a television show that I had missed. I didn't realize it was a movie and all that, but wow, what a film it is.
It's funny you say that because there was a Shaft TV series.
Oh, okay, so I'm not wrong then. I thought I remembered that. I didn't look it up. So
yeah, in like 73 or 74, they did like a couple episodes, I think, or a pilot in like 6 episodes or something on CBS, and Richard Roundtree came back to play Shaft.
CBS, wow.
Yeah.
Not the network I would have guessed for this, but okay. So I think about networks as I know them today. They were very different places back in the 70s. And good grief, I mean, America was a different place in the 70s, for goodness sakes. I mean, we're going to talk about New York a lot in this, but you and I were talking offline. It's like, remember when New York was dirty and scary? You know, because as a kid, that's all I knew New York to be. And then Rudy Giuliani came along, and now it's all corporate. So,
yeah, that's been the most disappointing part of my various trips to New York that I've taken. It's that there were no muggings. I didn't even see any rats, which was I expected to see rats.
Did you see any alleys where Jason was hanging around with some toxic sewage at least?
No toxic sewage. Maybe I didn't go far enough into the Bronx for that, but
oh, that's what that is. Yeah. So, well, you know, it's just off Times Square, so where all that goes down. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, this was a different world completely, and it's hard to talk about it and not talk about the obvious politics of it, and we will get into that. But Shaft, though, man, it's one of those things that like. I watched this movie, and I'd seen it before. It'd just been a long time. And again, I thought it was a television show, and you told me that, yes, indeed it was. But I don't know how this wasn't like multiple films, and like this wasn't the Die Hard of the 70s or something. Maybe it's because Death Wish came out, and that's what we latched onto. But, man, this movie's in the same vein as that kind of movie.
Well, there were 2 Shaft sequels in addition to the TV show. There's that 2000 Shaft reboot / continuation with Samuel L. Jackson playing Shaft's nephew, and there was in production for a while, there was a Son of Shaft with Richard Roundtree and Samuel L. Jackson both coming back.
I don't think that ever happened, though, so they never got that.
No, it's like happening right now.
Oh, they are doing that now? So
yeah, it was supposed to come out, they announced the title in August of 2017.
Okay.
They've cast like the Son of Shaft. There's a director attached. This dude named Tim Story.
Yeah, I know Tim Story. Who's playing Son of Shaft?
It's this guy Jesse Usher. He was on. He's in Independence Day Resurgence. He's playing Will Smith's son.
Yes, I remember that. He was playing Will Smith's son better than Will Smith's actual son does. And so, yeah, I remember that. So
yeah, and he's going to be in the Creed 2. They're filming Creed 2 now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's okay, because my first guess would be like, is Michael B. Jordan in that? You know, because it seems like tailor-made for him, because he looks like Richard Roundtree younger. But we'll get into him in a few weeks, I guess. But yeah, no, I'm talking about, I don't know how there weren't sequels to this in the 70s. You know, we were doing sequels in the 70s. Like, I don't know how we didn't do that.
Well, there were two. They just weren't good.
Oh, okay. So you're telling me there were other ones besides the Shaft and Son of Shaft that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shaft's Big Score. Shaft's Big Score came out like a year after this.
Oh.
And then 2 years later, I think Shaft Goes to Africa came out.
Ooh. Those don't sound. I'm glad I didn't know they existed, because I'm going to pretend like they don't. Because that neither one of those sound very interesting.
I'm sorry, it's Shaft in Africa.
Same difference. So, yeah. I mean, really, what's he going to do? Take diamond smugglers on? Let me guess. So, because what else would he do? So, but anyway, no.
Immigrant smugglers, but yes.
Oh, okay. There we go. So, see, still topical. So, go watch it, folks, if you want to. But we're here to review Shaft from 1971. And I ran across this one. It was on. Had to be on cable one day or something like that, and I happened to watch it like when, I don't know, I was probably in high school or college. I can't remember when I first saw Shaft, but I feel like I've always sort of known what Shaft is, probably because of that darn theme song. And growing up being a guitar player, everybody tells you what a wah pedal is. And, you know, when they look for exhibit A of what that is, you just do the Shaft theme. And I'm like, oh, that sound. Okay. So I feel like I've always known this movie. And then, you know, again, I watched it, you know, that one time and then watching it again for this review. But I remembered almost nothing about it other than I remembered a part where somebody flew out a window. I couldn't remember if Shaft threw them out the window or they jumped or how that went down, but there was like a Supermaning out a window. And then Shaft always talking on payphones, which, man, talk about a different world. Wow. I remember payphones and having to keep change in my car all the time. So, yeah. but I mean, really, that's how people discuss. But I was blown away watching this by, one, just how gritty it is and how violent, and I guess I've mispainted the past by thinking that everything got really uber violent when, you know, Saw came around, but that's not true. I mean, there were. I remember Walking Tall being a really violent film. This movie is in the same vein as that. It almost looks the same. It's just with African American leads versus a white sheriff in Tennessee.
Which that's a really interesting comparison to Walking Tall, by the way. But yeah, this was a staple on. I know it played a couple of times on Monster Vision, or Joe Bob's Hollywood Saturday Night, or whatever TNT was calling the Joe Bob Briggs experience. And I know they showed this one, and I think they showed Shaft in Africa. TNT used to show lots of crazy stuff before it became your home for CSI repeats or NCIS reruns or whatever they're showing now.
And the Shawshank Redemption every 5 minutes. So they're either showing the Shawshank Redemption, A Christmas Story, or a CSI. That's that entire show thing now, especially since they got out of the wrestling business. But for a while, that's what they had. But anyway, they never known how to program that channel so properly. It used to do Gone with the Wind reruns and James Bond-a-thons too. I remember those. Those were like spring and fall things. But yeah, Shaft to me, man. I've again, knowing the basics of the story and the background and things, I went in with a little bit of knowledge, but kind of went in about as cold as I could. I actually watched an original trailer from back in the day. It's on YouTube, and I mean, wow, those things have changed quite a bit before Don LaFontaine's voice got a hold of them and many other things. But like the bad jump cutting and just random scene plucked out of nowhere. I'm like, man, it didn't take much to get people to go to the film back in the day. But I was like, well, it probably cost $0.25. So yeah, that's what people did. This is not that big a deal. And so I remember watching this going, I'm like, okay, crime drama, and I gotta say, I mean, again, I threw Walking Tall out there, but I mean, there's so many of the '80s lone cop on a bender, movies that owe themselves a lot to the theme of, not the theme of, but the thematic elements of Shaft.
Well, this was a huge success for MGM, so that's not really a huge surprise.
Oh, I mean, $13 million on $500,000. I mean, holy cow.
Yeah, if that, and they didn't really have to do a ton of marketing to it for at least to get the word out in like the African American community. I know that they hired a black PR firm to publicize it.
Wow, that's interesting. So,
it was kind of a critical, like a really well respected movie critically. Mm-hmm. And it had a big crossover white audience, too.
I can see why. There's a lot in this to like that's, again, now we look back and call it the gritty 70s, but we didn't know that's what it was at the time. But, I mean, this was in the same line of what we think of when we think of the crime dramas of that era. And, I mean, there's a lot that goes on, yeah.
It's almost like a Black Serpico.
Yeah, that's a good comparative. I was sitting here trying to think of one, and Black Serpico. That's a good one. I'll actually re-watch that recently again, and doesn't hold up. Doesn't hold up as well as this does, and some other things do. Like it, you kind of want to punch Al Pacino in the face at some point, even though he's doing the right thing. It's like, shut up, like he just talks too much. But anyway, that's what you did back in the days because you didn't have CGI dinosaurs to throw into everything. So since we don't have any of that, Ron, why don't you tell people though? Because I have a feeling there's a good bit of our audience that knows of Shaft that's never seen it. So tell people what this movie's about.
Sure will. After a cool opening walk down 42nd Street and a brief conversation with Detective Vic Androzzi, two goons drop into Shaft's office to pay him a visit. One goon goes to jail, and the other goes for a trip to the morgue after flying out of Shaft's window. Here's the scoop, you dig? I keep screwing it up. It's fine.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's okay. Go for it.
All right. Take 3. Bumpy Jonas's daughter has been kidnapped, and there's only one cat that Harlem's dope kingpin can turn to. And that's one bad mother.
Shut your mouth.
Named Shaft. Bumpy pins the blame on a pesky squad of black militants led by a cat named Ben Buford. But dig this. Shaft heads uptown to visit Buford and his jive-ass militants, only for some heavy thugs with Tommy guns to drop in and shoot the place up to the tune of 4 dead militants and 1 dead finger man. Shaft isn't dealing with amateurs like Ben Buford anymore. Detective Vic let Shaft in on a little knowledge. Shaft's the guy they're after, not Ben Buford, and Shaft has been put in the middle of a budding war between the Mafia and Bumpy Jonas's crew, which could kick off a race war in Manhattan. Nobody wants that, except for maybe Ben Buford, and it's up to Shaft to stop the race war and save Bumpy's daughter, all while dodging hitmen, cops, and various other nefarious dudes. Shaft, always the smartest cat in the room, pays off a hippie to go turn his lights on, then gets the drop on 2 Philadelphia heavies sent to ice him. He turns them over to the cops, but not before finding out where Bumpy's daughter is being held captive. Shaft and Buford go after her, but Shaft gets shot up and Marcy gets taken away. Shaft gets fixed up by a street doctor, gets back in touch with Bumpy, and gets a gang of Ben's militants together to undertake a commando-style raid on the hotel where Marcy's being held captive. Shaft and the militants infiltrate the hotel, kill the mobsters, and rush Marcy out into a waiting car. Shaft calmly walks away from the hotel as police cars come rushing in, hops in the payphone, and drops a little knowledge in Detective Androzzi's ear about the upcoming fight between the gangsters. Shaft tells Vic, "Fix it yourself, shitty," and laughs hysterically, walking away while credits roll.
That is a very good summary of a lot that goes on, and I appreciate the lingo that you have adopted to try and talk through this, and demand that you keep that up the entire review. So, to see if you can pull that off now. So, man, so much to get into here, but honestly, the thing that strikes me about this one is really just how straightforward it is. It's kind of simple. You know, Shaft is a private detective who has tense relations, but seems to have at least one ally with the cops. And he's well known in his community and the local drug kingpin. His daughter gets kidnapped and Shaft has to come in and save the day. And then we get, throwaway extras from The Godfather to come over and have a little bit of war in the streets.
Well, it's established pretty early on that Shaft has 1 foot on the streets and 1 foot in Whitey's crawl. So yeah, and there's some allusion to Shaft and Andrazi going back a ways and being friends and knowing each other due to previous events where they've come into contact with one another. But it seems like pretty much everybody on the street knows Shaft and knows who Shaft is, because he is recognized and talked to by pretty much everybody he comes into contact with.
Yeah, and I get the sense that because that is somewhat because he stays around the same like 8 blocks. It seems like he just has sort of his territory that he works, and that's where he stays. And I don't know if they ever said it. I can't remember it coming out, but I got the sense that like Shaft was a cop at one time and then had gotten out of that racket because, and maybe I'm just placing that onto this because that's part of the story of the Samuel L. Jackson Shaft, is that he starts out as a cop and then ends up going into business for himself when Christian Bale, screws with his head a little bit. But I got the sense that like Shaft had been a cop or, had some relationship with Androsi at least. And he sort of operates in this area and he gets tips from the cops. He's always talking to the cops about what he's got going on. And I mean, I guess when you kill people and throw them out your window, that's you do get to talk to the cops often.
And I know at least in New York, private detectives have to be like licensed and they have to get permission to carry firearms. So I imagine he does have some kind of, if not law enforcement background, then he's got connections to the law enforcement community.
Something, yeah. I mean, he flashes a badge at one time,
and he seems to stick between like 42nd Street and like Greenwich Village.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So kind of like the Lower West Side ish.
Yeah, I mean, he stays in a certain area, but it gives this movie a sense though where you can have a location, but it still feels very open. And I feel like better versions of Grand Theft Auto, the video game, kind of take from the same idea here, is that you give people a world to play around in that feels open, yet you can get familiar with it. Like you can walk around enough in those open world games and figure out, okay, that's where the, stash is. That's where my hideout is. That's where I'm going to go rob next, whatever I'm going to do, or that's where I've got to go kill my rival gangsters, etc.
No, that's definitely a fair comparison. And it's kind of a nod to basically to how New York is laid out. It's laid out. It's essentially a series of neighborhoods, and if you live in a particular neighborhood, you don't really have to go outside of that area. Mm-hmm. Like if you're in downtown Brooklyn, there's because it's so hard to get around in New York, you develop a network of places that you can walk to from where you're at that are that's your newsstand, that's your grocery store. That's your bar, that's your diner, and it kind of adds to that. Like I imagine it was much worse, much more like that even back then.
Oh goodness, yeah. I mean, think about I grew up in the South, so it was all I dare say suburbs because that's not really it. Like you're in the middle of woods that have been carved out into neighborhoods, and there might be a highway rolling through them. Now it's very different nowadays, of course. But when I grew up in the late '70s or early '80s and things, through the '80s and things, you had to go somewhere to get to the grocery store, to get to the mall. You had to go places. But a big city, and the thing that like New York always captivated me with was how it was laid out. It was just big grids, and you didn't have to go more than just a little ways, and you had everything you could ever want inside of your neighborhood. And I used to think about, man, how cool would that be to live in a place like that? And, nowadays, like Amazon will just bring it to me so I don't have to go anywhere. But back in those days, I could see the appeal and why people dug that. So it's very cool. It gives this film a real setting though, because that cool walk down 42nd Street that opens up the movie, it sets everything in terms of tone that you need to know about this film. It lays all of it out, and the number of people that talk to Shaft, how he carries himself. That one guy tries to sell him a stolen watch or a hot watch or whatever, and he flashes that badge. Which I'm like, PIs don't have badges; they have little pieces of paper. But whatever, that's what we go. And he the guy just runs away like a scalded rabbit. And it's like, okay, I get it. That this guy is so bad that the bad guys won't mess with him. The good guys talk to him, and he can just walk and roam free and wait for stuff to happen.
Yeah, it's really, between that and the opening theme song, that's one of my favorite movie opening montages ever. And I think that's part of the it kind of reminds me a little bit of the scene in Urban Cowboy.
Yeah.
Is it Urban Cowboy? Yeah, John Voight and
Urban Cowboy.
Yeah, Urban Cowboy. It reminds me a little bit like they took this idea of the guy just walking through the streets and they applied it to Urban Cowboy, even down to the jaywalking.
Yeah, I mean, Taxi Driver. There's all kinds of stuff that you could think borrowed from this or went from this, right? That's just what they went for. But again, it sets a scene. Not Urban Cowboy is the John Travolta movie.
Midnight Cowboy.
I was like,
not Urban Cowboy.
Yeah, I was like, wait, that didn't sound right. Hold on.
Well, it makes more sense.
It does make more sense. Yeah,
it makes more sense in the second movie when Shaft meets Drinkenstein.
Oh man, I can't believe you dropped Drinkenstein in here. So, but anyway, that's not even a Travolta film. So that's a Stallone. But anyway, we do get introduced though real quick to the heavy of the movie. He's sort of like the anti-hero bad guy, Bumpy Jonas, right? Because two of his goons come in to talk to Shaft, and what you realize real quick is that there are sets of organized crime here. There's the Italian organized crime, which is the Godfather style stuff, and then there's the African American Harlem style organized crime, and Bumpy is the leader of all of that. And when he wants to talk to you, you're going to go talk to him, unless you're Shaft and you're bad.
And let's not bury the lead that one of Bumpy's henchmen is I believe it's the guy who was a trainer for Muhammad Ali, but it could be a different.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Wow, yeah. It would make sense.
Yes, he was one of Muhammad Ali's trainers, and he wrote a bunch of the stuff that Ali used in his talks.
Oh, really? Well, that makes total sense then, because I was sitting here going man, it would have been cool if Ali just kind of walked across and said, "Hey, Shaft," at some point, because it does have a lot of that same feel to it. But Roundtree here, man, the thing I like about 70s movies is how the editing, they decided to show good fighting sequences. You just have to cut everything up where it's real disjointed, so it feels like you're a part of the fight. If you're in a fight, you don't really remember who walked where and stood where. You just know that there was a punch thrown and stuff went down. And that's the way this comes off. And I quarter that again on a style of filmmaking that's just gone now. We don't do that anymore. But in those days, it worked. And it works here when he gets the one guy and beats him down, and the other guy flies by him, literally out the window.
Yeah, it is a really cool style. It kind of came back for a little bit in the 2000s with Paul Greengrass, the Flight 97 and the early Bourne movies, where there's kind of a hectic, shaky camera. But but that it's more about moving the camera and less about doing a bunch of cuts.
Yeah, because in this case, even if they were filming with a steady cam, which I don't think they were back in those days, it was all about cutting the film up. Now you shake the screen, give everybody vertigo, and make them sick. But this way, it comes off again more frenetic, and I kind of like that feel of it. Because the one thing I'll say about Shaft, there's a lot of crazy stuff that goes down around him, and there's some pretty wicked action and things like that. But he never, his pulse never gets above 75. He is so cool, and I know that is a trope of the character, but to see it playing out scene by scene, I'm like, man, Roundtree really does play this cool. And I'm going to ask you, who is this guy? Besides Shaft, I don't know anything about him.
Who, Richard Roundtree?
Yeah.
I think that's been his big role. I know before this he did like commercials and like print ads and stuff. But mostly he's best known for he's best known for two things. He's known best for being Shaft. I mean, he was on Roots. He did City Heat with Clint Eastwood, and Burt Reynolds. He's also one of the rare male breast cancer survivors. But yeah, basically he was like, this is still his biggest role and his best known role.
I mean, I remember like the cameo he had in Seven, which that's a Fincher thing, is to take, former stars and just kind of plot them and pepper them through his movies. But he's in that like 2 scenes, so it's not that big of a deal. He really is the one where he's sitting down talking to somebody. But the guy is just the epitome of what I would call 70s cool, Like he's always dressed. He's not dressed up, but he's dressed well and he's dressed slick. And it's like he's always hyper aware of everything around him. So it's kind of like a Black Wolverine or something. You know what I mean? Like he just knows where everything's going to happen next, and he's always able to make the move. And when we get that standoff later, where the guys have got guns on him and stuff like that, and when it all goes to hell, he's still able to get out of it alive and take one of them down with him. And I was like, man, this guy is really tough. And they play him off as this tough guy. I mean, again, the tough cop or the tough law enforcement official protagonist, whatever, against the bad guys. That's an age-old story. Like, we see that all the time, right? But the way he plays it is there's an underlying cool to it that you usually don't get with those other guys.
It's like he's a guy who's seen a lot and been through a lot.
Yeah, it's not in there, but like I kind of took in my head, I'm like, this guy was in either the Korean War or was in Nam and had come back, and like none of this was going to faze him anymore. I mean, we were in the middle, the height of the Vietnam War at this point, so it's one of the reasons cinema is so dark and gritty in the 70s is that everything seemed to suck. Around you, and people came back and had a really awful experience and needed some way to outlet and deal with it. So I sort of in my own head just made that little retcon. They never say it, and I don't know if that's part of the character or not, but I could see it, like it makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely feels like there is some kind of backstory there that we're not getting, because he does do a pretty good job of planning that commando mission later on. So yeah, that kind of leads me to think that him and probably a good portion of the militants have some kind of military experience, have been to Vietnam or something. But that's what I thought basically about Ben Buford and his whole crew, that these were a bunch of guys who had been radicalized and once they came back from Vietnam and were pushed up into the worst neighborhood in Manhattan at that time.
Yeah, well, I mean, and can I just tell you, Christopher St. John as Ben Buford almost steals this movie for me. He is so good as the anti-hero, militant on the side. Like, he's a bad guy. He's a criminal by all, rights and definitions. But, the enemy, my enemy is my friend sometimes, and that's what happens here. And he turns out to be a very useful ally when Shaft needs to go and make the final raid and everything. And I mean, he's part of all of it to begin with. But I mean, I like that he's not just cookie cutter militant too. He's smart. Like, he talks about, like, if I'm going to do this, you got to pay my guys. We got to do this. Like, he's planning ahead. And I thought he gave a fantastic performance.
Yeah, he's really good. And Christopher St. John was actually a member of the Actors Studio in New York. So yeah, he is not a lightweight by any sense of the word.
Now, you can definitely tell, like, he knows what. And apparently, not much of an actor. Like, he went on to be a director and things like that, and did a few other spots. But this is his biggest role, and I'm like, man, this guy's really good. So I enjoyed watching him and watching Shaft play off of him too, because Shaft, I almost think like Shaft looks at him like, this is a younger me. because it's not said, but like I take Shaft for like late 30s, early 40s in this movie, so he's been around a little while, but he's not out of the game yet. But Buford's definitely a kid in his 20s.
Yeah, Buford is definitely played younger than Shaft. Mm-hmm. And I could see that, or I could see Buford being a more idealistic version of young Shaft. This might have been young Shaft before Shaft realized just how messed up the world is.
Well, or just how complicated it all is. And that's the thing, like 3/4 of this movie is you don't know that Bumpy's trying to get Shaft to intervene in this race war. That's basically what's happening, and the fact that his daughter gets kidnapped as part of it is just part of the Italian goons' way of doing business and stuff. But the cops know, and Vic tells him early on, like, look, there's a race war going on, and you're going to get in the middle of it. And I like that it's a little bit of an unraveling mystery for us. But once you know that and have seen it, you can watch the movie with a different eye. And you can see Shaft not figuring all of it out. And that kind of vulnerability makes for your protagonist to be much more relatable. Because what's the trope about all these movies is that, Schwarzenegger and Stallone can never do any wrong as cops, right? Or when they do anything, like they're perfect, right? And the thing that made Die Hard work was that Bruce Willis looked like you. He just got into some real difficult stuff. Now, he ended up doing some insane things in that movie, but in the beginning of it in particular, he's just a dude. And, Roundtree's a good-looking guy, and he's pretty well built and stuff, but he's not some specimen out there, so it's...
No, he's not like Jim Brown.
Yeah, he's not Jim Brown, he's not Muhammad Ali, he's not Carl Weathers, he's not one of those. He just looks like a guy that can handle himself, but he still has to think and figure it out. And I mean, heck, we get to see him get shot and all kinds of stuff here. So the neat part of this is that when you realize that this is all about one guy really has to intervene and stop a race war, which is pretty insane when you think about it.
Yeah, because he's basically perfectly positioned between these two polar opposite worlds.
Yeah.
And he's like the only one who can move between the two.
Yeah, you said that early on that, he's got 1 foot, in the white world and 1 foot in his own world, too. And I think that's on purpose because he knows, life is not black and white. It's pretty complicated. And if I'm going to survive, especially if you're a private detective, you're pretty much a small business owner. You're in business for yourself. So you're always out looking for stuff, and you want to be the kind of person that has the reputation that anybody can come to you. And I mean, we see that several times.
Yeah, and we see throughout the movie that he knows everyone.
Yeah.
Basically, regardless of who they are or what they do, or what their race, age, ethnicity, etc., he is like the universal kind of go-between. Everybody, like, he talks to the guys at the shoe shine shop. He talks to the old blind guy at the newspaper agent. He's friends with the gay bartender. He's friends with that burned out hippie.
Yeah, he goes and gives a kid, $10 so he can go get something to eat, because he sees he's cold on the street and he knows
he's helping out the kids.
Yeah, he's the unofficial mayor of Harlem is what it is. I mean, that's kind of what we see here about Shaft is that he's the community director before we knew what those things were or we had those, right? Like, this is who this guy would be.
And it's kind of a testament or kind of a nod to what is later a trope about how every cop has an informant or whatever.
Right.
Especially in like 70s TV shows like Starsky and Hutch or whatever. Mm-hmm. But Shaft can get information from all these different communities that don't usually interact with each other.
Well, and that's the thing is he gets that information because they don't realize they're interacting with each other. They're just telling Shaft, and they trust Shaft. So I wouldn't tell Androsi nothing, but I'll tell Shaft. Now, Shaft goes and tell Androsi, well, that's fine because Shaft told him. It's that go-between. Again, he's that perfect vessel that can plug in between all these places. And it comes out to be that's perfect because it allows him to put together the group that goes and saves the daughter and saves the day in the end, but not before they go through a whole lot of hell. I mean, when he goes to Ben's place to begin with, and all those guys get shot up, I didn't see that coming. All the Tommy guns and everything. I was like, man, I'm in a Godfather movie all of a sudden, and I had forgotten. Oh yeah, that's right. The Italian mob are involved in this too.
Well, this is kind of the thing that announces the presence of the mob, because up until this time, Bumpy is pinning it on the militants.
Right, but
Shaft
but he doesn't.
doesn't.
But what we learn is that he knows that's bullshit. Like, Bumpy knows that's not right. He's just trying to get Shaft to get the militants on his side.
Or he was trying to get Shaft to take the militants down for him.
Well, yeah, either or. Yeah.
There is a lot of tension between Bumpy's crew and the militants.
True.
And they make a point to say that Bumpy controls Harlem except for these few blocks that the militants control.
Yeah. So
I'm thinking that Bumpy was hoping to use Shaft as a misdirect, or to get the Mafia to go after Shaft and to take out these militants.
If there's anything that's lacking in this film, it is the Mafia end of things. They do just appear to cause havoc and to be things to shoot at in a lot of ways. Like, there's no scene of the Mafia guy going, now this is what we got to do with these guys, or anything like that. Like that, and maybe this movie purposely left that out and didn't want to do it. But I was sitting there wondering, like, I just needed one scene. There's enough scenes of people sitting around talking to each other. Goodness sakes, they couldn't have one where the Italian guys were like plotting, because they just seemed to be there to be pure evil and shoot things up at all times.
Well, I think that's kind of what Vic's role is.
Is that what that is? Well, but he's the cop, so
yeah, he's the cop, but he's also the guy who knows that the Mafia is moving.
Oh, that's yeah.
That they do see these mobsters come into town, and he's the guy who tells Shaft that those mobsters are here for him and not for Ben or for Bumpy.
Yeah, and it does lead to that great scene later where Shaft calls him from the bar, and they have that little code back and forth so that the two guys can't get the drop on him, which I liked that. I thought that was smart. But I don't know. I just feel like they're underdeveloped, if anything is, in this movie.
Yeah, I can see there, but I also don't think that they're really meant to be developed, because I don't think that's the audience that they're looking for.
Oh no, and that is very true. It is not for them to be a part of this. I mean, this is about people that want to see Shaft and want to see this community really take care of its own. I mean, that's what's happening here, right? I mean, and just get into it. The politics of the 70s here or whatever. This is a very different time than what we live in now, but yet there's a lot of things still going on today that relate.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's interesting because in the source material in the book, the original book, Shaft is white.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
But Gordon Parks changed Shaft to black once he cast Richard Roundtree, which kind of changes the whole tone of the film.
Yeah, it gives it a different tone. Well, I'm almost intrigued to go read that now to see how it would play and how different it is from what. Have you read it? Do you know how different it is than the film that we got?
I have not read it, but he did write like 8 books or something with Shaft as a main character.
Yeah, I knew there were like a series of Shaft books, but
after the success of the movie, Shaft, because the movie was sold basically before the book came out.
Not an uncommon thing, though. Like, anticipated books have often gotten movie deals. I mean, John Grisham, I think half of his films were about books he hadn't written yet. So
yeah, and basically he went to the producers with the idea and some storyboards and sold the book, and then when they were working on the script, him and the director Gordon Parks and the other screenwriter John Black all kind of worked on it together to give it that feel and
that changes
the character. Yeah,
that changes the dynamic of it though completely if you think about it like that. But in this case, I mean, again, it's we don't. we don't need anybody's help. We can handle our own. That seems to be a big theme of everything. It's the theme of the militants. It's certainly what, Bumpy wants to be left alone and just run his little kingdom. And then there's Shaft, who's like, you can do that, Jack, but you're going to have to, work with the man some too. And that's his role, is to be the go-between. He's the liaison, if you will.
Yeah, he's the guy who is kind of in all these worlds, and he's the guy who kind of he both smooths everything out and kind of brings both sides together against the mafia, their bigger enemy. Because you get the impression, at least from this movie, that Bumpy and his crew are not good people, but the mafia would be worse.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's that one scene where Shaft comes in to see Bumpy and his guys want to frisk him. He's like, you need 6 more because it ain't happening, and Bumpy finally says, "I'll send him in," and then that goon says, "One day we're going to tangle Shaft." And Shaft's like, "Yeah, right." Like, man,
that's Boudini Brown. That's Willie.
Yeah, I was like, that's fantastic. So I was like, that was a great scene, though. But what you realize too, and this is the cool thing about this movie, is that they find Marcy in the second act. Like, usually that's the end of the movie, right? But no, they find her and they get to her, and then we get that standoff and that gunfight. Out of nowhere, where Shaft gets hurt, and that's when he has to go, full commando to go get her again. But I liked that they set that up where he actually gets to her, and then she just slips through his fingers. And I'm like, that's a 70s thing. Like, 80s and 90s and, beyond movies, it was always you never got close to your target or to your goal at the end, the princess at the end of the Mario level, whatever, But this in the 70s, you would get close and fail, and then you would come back and get it. I mean, Rocky's built on that. He gets beat and then he comes back and wins. I mean, that's the whole premise there. And I liked that idea that, again, it made the lead character vulnerable. He wasn't perfect. He didn't have it all worked out, and he couldn't talk his way out of everything. Sometimes he was going to have some help, and this is when he went and got it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Shaft is also kind of a figure of like upward mobility. Because he's got a really nice apartment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, the money he gets out of Bumpy, I'm like, in those days, $20,000 was a lot of money. Nowadays, that's like $50,000. But I'm like, this didn't seem to like the first time Shaft did negotiations on a job. No. Like you called the sequel was called Shaft's Big Score. I'm like, I thought that was this. I mean, that would set this guy up for years.
Yeah, but it's interesting because we're talking a lot about his ability to move in between worlds, but he is doing so, and he's doing so in a very successful way. He's not like, he talks to the cops, but he doesn't sell out to the cops. He talks to Bumpy, but he doesn't sell out to Bumpy or his men. He's very much it's like a combination of like the rogue cop and like the action hero, in the sense that he does things his own way, he gets results, and he's doing well enough that later when the police have to lean on him a little bit, Androsi tells him, look, if we do take you in for this manslaughter thing, yeah, maybe you'll get away with it. Maybe you won't go to jail, but you'll be out of business because you will have 6 months or 8 months or a year where you won't be able to work.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And again, that's why you see Shaft, and you made a good point and a good phrase, is he doesn't sell out to either side, and he doesn't have to. And that's the thing, is in the end, like I asked myself, actually, I was like, does he kind of go over to the dark side to get the job done here? I was like, no, not really. I mean, he's always seemed to want to have Ben's guys involved from the get-go, because that was going to be a way to try to foster peace between the militants and Bumpy, because he sees the value in, you two don't need to kill each other, because again, the mob would be worse.
Yeah, and it's kind of bringing together, like, not quite bringing together two sides of the community, but like definitely keeping them from eating their own, so to speak.
Well, I mean, look, let's talk about what was going on in the 70s. You have to bring Martin Luther King Jr.'s followers with Farrakhan and Malcolm X's followers to accomplish the same goal. Those are different sides of a similar coin, but they go about things very differently, right? So how do you get the Baptists and the radicals to be in the same room together? You know, that's really what he's doing. So, which by the way, you can't, so don't. So, but anyway, in this movie, it works long enough that it gets through. And what I love about the showdown in the end is that, I mean, they have that whole bit where they dress like hotel workers to avoid suspicion, you know, and Shaft goes through the guy's window on the roof. And I'm like, John McClane totally ripped that off. I was like, yeah, once again, the white man rips off something good. But I mean, really, I was like, I've seen this action scene in 50 other movies and had no idea it came from here.
Yeah, and it almost comes off like a Dirty Dozen type of scene.
Very much. Well, I'm glad you said that, because I was like, Wild Bunch, Dirty Dozen, like all of that is what's happening here.
Yeah, and it's it works really well, I think. Like, I think it's really well executed, and that's one of the things I can say about this movie is that Gordon Parks makes it look great despite not taking the grit from it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know anything about his background or if you've looked into his background, but he was like a photographer in World War II. He worked for like Vogue, doing fashion shoots. He shot for Life magazine. Like he was a world-renowned photographer.
I see, and that makes total sense. And I didn't look it up because I knew you would, honestly. But I said to myself, I was like, whoever made, like, the director and the DP here, like, these are people that understand how to use a camera. And like for $500,000, this movie looks amazing. And I mean, for something that's, what are we talking about here now, Ron? It's 47 years old as of this recording, right? Still works. I mean, like it definitely looks like it's part of its time, and it should. But I don't get taken out of the movie by the way it looks. You know, like not at all. Like I watched this movie and it just sort of happens because everything looks so good. The colors are good. The scenes are good. And again, they do a good job with even like sound design here too. You know, everything just matches and works.
And that's, if you get a chance, watch it again and try to look at how the actual scene composition where people are placed in scenes. Because it is like this is one of those movies that's like an every frame's a painting type of movie to me.
Oh, I agree with you. And
for example, the last big conversation between Bumpy, Ben, and Shaft. You've got Ben on one side, Bumpy in the middle with his feet kicked up, and then Shaft on the other shoulder. And it's just a really cool looking shot because it's kind of like these three different communities. Well, it's these three different communities all coming together, but it's like these three instincts. There's the kind of the militant way. There's the capitalist, like I'm doing this to get my money type of way, and then there's the we're all just trying to survive here type of way.
Right, exactly. And again, Shaft he's not literally in the middle of them, but he is in the middle of them. But the way that shoots, you can see, and the way I took that scene in particular, Bumpy's the one that looks relaxed. Shaft and Ben are a little tense. And I'm like, Bumpy's the other guy that like he never gets overly emotional about it, even when it involves his daughter. And I mean, you can tell he adores her. There's like 1,000 photographs of her up in his office, right? But he's not going to let that, you know, cloud his judgment. It's like, we got to be smart about this. It's the way these things are done, you know? And I'm like, man, this is a guy who you wonder if, you know, he hasn't dealt with this sometime before, you know, and or on the other side hasn't been the kidnapper and done this.
Oh, I have no doubt he has been, but he's very much like he says, he's like, you know, I can always get more money, but I can't get another daughter. But at the same time, he's not willing to go too crazy spending his money.
Yeah, I mean, he'll do a little bit. He's like, that's all I can do, you know? And it's like, I mean, and again, we're talking about sums of money that, look, that sounds like a lot of money to me now. In 1971, that was a whole lot of money. And I mean, that would have been like, you got that just laying around to, deal with kidnapping problems? Holy cow. So,
yeah, especially since it's just going to be a stack of cash.
I mean, yeah. And I mean, it is straight cash. I was like, wow. So somebody needs to talk to Bumpy about interest rates and, long-term annuity. But I guess they didn't do that back in the day. Well, you know what? The interest rate sucked into the 70s like it does now. So never mind. Keep it in your sock drawer. It probably gains just as much. But but no, I love how, it goes down in the end. Ben and his men come down the hall. They deal with the mafia. They shoot them all up. Everybody's done. And I like how, Shaft walks away, and I did get a kick out of that last phone conversation with the lieutenant. Like, no, you cleaned it up. Like, I'm done. You cleaned it up. And he just walks away, and it's like, well, that's it, and, but I mean, again, I thought that was great, because this is another thing the 70s would do is you'd stop on a frame and just the sound would continue on. And I was like, yeah, it was the right ending for the movie when it happened. And then that theme song kicks in. I mean, a lot has been said about that. We talked about it a little bit, but man, Isaac Hayes, I know a lot of people only know him as Chef, from South Park or whatever, but the man was a musician and could weave a tapestry with words and sound. And that funk song is amazing.
Oh yeah. It's one of the, it's like one of the biggest and most popular movie themes that has ever been. Like, it's always on those AFI top 100 movie theme lists and stuff. So, and with good reason. And in a couple of years, when Isaac Hayes makes his acting debut, they will bill him as the Oscar winner Isaac Hayes.
Yeah.
Because he wins the Oscar for the theme for Shaft. He did not win an Oscar for his acting.
But you know what, though? Now, and there's a reason for that, because he's not a grand actor. But this theme, it totally works, as well as this movie works, too. So, Ron, we're at the part of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts and popcorn ratings. So what are yours for Shaft?
Oh, I'm going to give Shaft a large popcorn. Like you said, it is one of the movies that holds up the best from this time period. It doesn't indulge in what you will see later in the 70s with, that 70s pacing where everything just kind of feels to move slower. It's quick and dirty, but at no point is it unpleasant to look at. It looks great throughout the whole thing. The theme music is great. I think 2 of the songs for this soundtrack were actually nominated for the Oscar for Best Song, and the theme from Shaft won, obviously, but one of the other songs in the movie was also nominated. And yeah, there's a reason that this helped launch a genre. I mean, Melvin Van Peebles is going to say that Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song did it, but this was in production while he was still making his movie. So it's a very reasonable thing to do to claim that this is the godfather of the blaxploitation movie genre. And it also is kind of, it is almost like if the first Die Hard didn't involve Hans Gruber and it was just like John McClane fighting crime on the streets of New York, it could very much have felt like this movie. So yeah, I'm large popcorn. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and then I'm glad to have had an excuse to watch it again.
Yeah, I'm going to join you in the large popcorn. This movie's fantastic. If it's the godfather of anything, it's the godfather of action cop movies. I mean, it really is. Like, all of them owe something to this. And I don't say that into like, oh, there wouldn't be if there weren't for this. I'm just saying this is a good movie. And if you haven't seen it, if you're like me, and if maybe you only saw it once or didn't really remember it, or if you've never seen it, folks, you need to go watch this. Like, this is one you need to seek out and watch. This is worth seeing. Every frame's amazing looking, like Ron and I've said. The music's great. The action's great. But the thing about it is, unlike a lot of 70s movies, and you nailed it, Ron, this one isn't laborious at all. Like, when it ended, I was like, that's it? I was like, oh, man. Like, I wanted more. And not so much that I want to go watch those 2 badly named sequels, but I was like, yeah, there should be more to this. Like, but in Legacy, there is more. There's a lot more to it. I'll go ahead and put it in there too. That 2000 version of Shaft isn't half bad. I'm going to say the first act of that doesn't work that well. It's pretty lousy. But after that, it turns into a good movie, and the back two ends of it are pretty good. So especially if you want to see Christian Bale be like a really good bad guy, you need to go watch that. So much better than his American Psycho performance, which everybody just loves, and that movie sucks. But I'm telling you, he's so good in that.
Oh, hard disagree.
Oh, well, okay,
on American Psycho anyway.
Hold that thought on American Psycho. But yeah, the Shaft remake's good, but the original is where it starts. You need to check that out. So large popcorn for sure. So we said we were going to do it, Ron. We were going to tell people what else we were talking about during our month of February here. So what else are we reviewing now that we've done Shaft?
Well, the next movie will probably be the comedy blaxploitation, possibly a spoof from 1975. None other than the Human Tornado himself, Dolomite. We are going to take a more modern look at that kind of spoof with one of my favorite movies of the last 10 years. And one of the funniest comedies to come out in a long, long time, Black Dynamite.
That's Michael J. White from
Michael J. White from Spawn.
And Dark Knight, if you haven't seen Spawn. So, yeah.
Yes. And he is one of the Foot Clan kids in the original Ninja Turtles movie from the 90s, if you didn't know that.
I did not know that. Holy cow. Now I almost want to go watch that. Almost. So
maybe not.
Yeah,
maybe and of course we're going to finish it up with one of the first blaxploitation superheroes turned big budget movie icon in Black Panther.
Yeah, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, man. We usually Kurt handles that for us with Famous Factor stuff, but we both said nope. We're doing Black Panther. We called dibs on that. I love Chadwick Boseman. I don't think I've ever seen him anything I didn't like him in. So when he appeared as Black Panther in the Captain America film, I was like, oh yes, and then I found out he was doing his own, and everything I've seen about that looks amazing. So I'm looking forward to that one. I know what. The trope of Dolomite. I had never seen it before our review, and I'd never heard of Black Dynamite. So I'm happy to have a month of basically being the newbie for everything here. So
yeah, I'm very excited. I've been pestering you about Dolomite for weeks now. And I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on it.
Oh, I definitely have some. Folks can tune in next week to hear that. Of course, you can always find our episodes on our website, continuousplaypodcast.com/movies. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever you get your podcast. If you like the show, leave us a positive review. It helps other people find the show. We appreciate your support. We've got a huge back catalog now, folks. And I mean, if you go back all the way back to 2009, 2010, I'm not going to lie, some of those podcasts aren't that good, but we've got some good movies we talk about. But we've been doing this for a long time now, so we're almost at 300 reviews, which is amazing for me to think about, that there's that much of me talking about movies on the internet somewhere. So anyway, if you like the show, folks, check it out. Leave us a review. You can, of course, follow us on the social media. You can find me on Twitter at JNewcastleCPP, and Ron, you're at Hollywood Ron, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so check us out. Leave us a review. Let us know what you think of the show. We appreciate your support. Until next time, sucker, we'll see you on Filmstrip.
Thank you for listening to Filmstrip. You can find more episodes on our website, continuousplaypodcast.com/movies. Please leave us a positive review on iTunes and link up with us on Facebook. The Filmstrip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121.